What if, behind the veiled language of the King James Version, beyond English tradition, the unyielding truth of Hebrew and Greek reveals something far more severe? Scripture shows celestial beings breaching eternal boundaries, insurgents defying God's fixed decree. What if the Nephilim were not anomalies but aggressors, participants in a calculated assault on the promise of redemption itself? This subject transcends folklore. It reveals rebellion's blueprint and simultaneously unveils the map of salvation. Hidden in plain sight, yet unmistakably present, the reality of the Nephilim reshapes the biblical storyline from Eden's first promise to Calvary's final victory. This raises a critical question: who were the Nephilim in truth beyond the softened contours of later translations? And what do they reveal about a heavenly rebellion against God's unassailable authority? The importance of this inquiry is profound. Spiritually, it exposes the sanctity of God's design and the seriousness with which He enforces boundaries to preserve covenant purity. It connects chaos to mercy and compels believers to grasp the depth of Scripture's rescue narrative. My name is Pastor Najam. The first clue emerges from Genesis 6:4. The Hebrew term Nephilim derives from naphal, meaning to fall. This points not merely to physical size but to status, fallen ones. These were not simply giants but intruders who descended unlawfully into the human realm. This leads directly to the next question. If they fell, who exactly fell and what forbidden desire drove their interaction with humanity? Here, divine counsel theology becomes essential. Psalm 82 presents God enthroned over heavenly beings. In this context, sons of God consistently refers to angelic agents. The Septuagint reinforces this by translating the phrase as hoi angeloi tou theou, the angels of God. The next question follows naturally. How does this heavenly breach reverberate throughout the rest of Scripture? The pattern is not isolated. After the flood, remnants appear in Numbers 13 with the Anakim, and in Deuteronomy 3 with the Rephaim, towering adversaries confronting God's chosen people. Ancient Near Eastern cultures spoke of God-human hybrids, but the Bible deliberately reframes them not as heroes, but as condemned rebels. The implications are sobering. Boundary violations invite judgment, yet even amid corruption, God forges a path toward restoration. At the center of this issue stands a clear conclusion. The Nephilim were the offspring of rebellious angels and human women. While obscured in some English translations, this truth becomes unmistakable through Hebrew etymology and Greek witness. This raises another pressing concern. If this conflict marked the ancient world, could its echoes signal future developments? Scripture itself draws attention to this. The King James Version uses the word giants, but the Hebrew insists on fallen ones. The language recoils from the violation it describes. The question remains unavoidable. Who were the Nephilim fundamentally, and why does this matter today? Ancient evidence sharpens the picture. The Dead Sea Scrolls, including fragments of 1 Enoch found at Qumran, interpret Genesis 6 as an angelic descent. This was not a later invention, but an ancient understanding embedded in Second Temple Judaism. Texts such as Jubilees describe the Watchers, angelic sentinels who abandoned their appointed domain. The narrative expands beyond height or strength and focuses instead on transgression of divine boundaries. This theme stretches from Genesis 3:15, the promise of the woman's seed, through the giants of Canaan. The goal was corruption of the messianic line. The assault was not random, it was covenantal sabotage. Linguistic evidence reinforces this conclusion. The Hebrew phrase Beni Elohim always refers to heavenly beings in the Old Testament, as seen in Job 38:7. The Aramaic Targums explicitly identify them as angels. This brings us to motive. Was this merely desire or a strategic attempt to corrupt humanity through hybridization? Second Temple literature, including 1 Enoch 7, presents the result as violent overlords who spread chaos and forbidden knowledge. The biblical narrative continues this thread. Goliath in 1 Samuel 17 stands as a remnant of this corrupted lineage, defeated by David as a foreshadowing of messianic victory. This interpretation is not imposed on Scripture from outside. It arises naturally from Scripture itself. Ancient Jewish authorities such as Philo and Josephus affirmed angelic intrusion. This was the dominant understanding long before later theological shifts. The Sethite interpretation deserves fair consideration. It proposes that the sons of God were righteous descendants of Seth who intermarried with Cain's line. However, this view struggles against the consistent Hebrew usage, the testimony of ancient texts, and the scale of corruption that necessitated the flood. Historically, the Sethite view gained prominence much later, particularly in Augustine's era, as a corrective against speculative excess. Scripture presents a broader cosmic conflict. Jude 6 speaks of angels who abandon their proper domain. 2 Peter links their judgment to the flood. Isaiah and Revelation trace rebellion from heavenly defiance to ultimate defeat. Yet judgment is not the final word. God's redemptive countermeasure unfolds. The flood purges corruption, Israel confronts and dismantles surviving strongholds. David's victory over Goliath anticipates Christ's ultimate triumph. The aim was always the preservation of the promised seed. Through Noah, through Israel, through Christ, God safeguards redemption. Even eschatological passages echo ancient patterns, though Scripture exercises restraint and does not invite unchecked speculation. Christ's victory seals the conflict. The seed war ends in resurrection and eternal reign. The Nephilim represent rebellion, but Christ represents its termination. The seed was guarded, the battle resolved, history bends toward restoration. This truth calls for discernment, not fear. Scripture warns believers to test spiritual claims, to honor God's boundaries, and to embrace hope. Even angels were judged for transgression. Humanity is not exempt, yet the seed remained pure. The seed prevailed. That seed is Christ. Just as ancient beings crossed forbidden lines, modern humanity flirts with its own boundary violations, merging flesh with machine, pursuing godlike autonomy. Scripture consistently warns that God honors limits, and rebellion echoes across every age. The story does not end in darkness, it ends in victory.